while we're waiting for that one person to come in, we will proceed with the agenda business. First of all, is approval of the agenda. Is there anything there that, is there anything additional that we need to consider today? Any member of the board have anything else?
No.
Okay, may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Move the agenda.
Okay, Landsberg moves, we approve the agenda. Second, please.
Lee seconds.
Thank you. Motion by Landsberg, second by Lee to approve the agenda. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? We won't require a roll call for a administrative motion like that. Okay, that allows us, we've now asked for public comment. Our screen is showing the email for our clerk. If you wish to submit a comment, it will be read into the record, at least the first 3 minutes of it. So please feel free to do so. I see we've actually put a 2-minute limit on what's read. Okay, and our comments, all comments that come to us will be posted online as noted on the screen in front of you. All right, that will conclude public comment as there is none at this moment. And we'll now move on to agency business. Item 1 is our consent calendar. That's the 3 items, A, B, and C. And is there any comments or questions, or does any member of the board wish to remove any of the consent items for specific consideration?
No.
If not,
I'll make a motion to move the consent calendar.
thank you.
Lee.
We have motion by Commissioner Lee. Is there a second?
Landsberg will second.
Okay, motion by Lee, second by Landsberg to approve the consent calendar items A, B, and C. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. The second item on the agenda is the Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency General Manager update and operations update. And Tim Bush, is that Tim or is that Stan?
Tim, because Stan's really controlling the slideshow presentation today, I'll cover both the GM and operations manager update. We did not prepare a separate slideshow for this today because when we put this together, we weren't quite sure how easy or hard this virtual meeting would be. So I'll really just be a verbal update today. Couple of things to update the board on is the agency did complete the America Water Infrastructure Act Risk and Resiliency Assessment that was submitted to the EPA in March. That you may recall was due March 31 this year. We are now working on our emergency response plan. I'm also required under that program that's due in September. So we'll get that done ahead of that time. This is a new ongoing requirement for the agency. We will have to do an update to this document every 5 years going forward. So you'll see that in future years as a budget item in about 5 years from now. The agency is part of the Sacramento River Regional Group working on the Sacramento River Sanitary Survey 2020 update. That work is currently underway. It is led by the city of Sacramento. They recently did visit the joint intake, really for the first time, because the last time this update was done in 2015, the intake was under construction, so it's completed now, so they're actually able to come and do a visit. They did that just before the shelter-in-place order went into effect. So that work is ongoing now. The plan is that it will be completed in December this year. Reason why it's stretched out until December of this year is we were waiting for guidance from the State Water Resources Control Board on any new items that they want to be included in this document. It seems to be kind of a typical way these things are done. We did receive notification this week that on April 13th, the Bureau of Reclamation has declared this year to be a Shasta critical year. What that means to the agency is that our CVP water right, our 10,000 acre-foot water right, is cut to 75% of that. So we will have 7,500 acre-feet of water for this year, rather than the 10,000 for the duration of the term 91 curtailment. Well, how that practically impacts us is that the agency will be delivering a reduced water supply to the partners for the duration of term 91. The reason why that happened, it originally was not going to be a Shasta critical year. Bureau of Reclamation sent a note a few weeks ago that they were going to revisit it on account of February being a very dry month. March and April have been disappointing. Because of that, Shasta did not receive its amount of inflow as required, thereby triggering Shasta critical year. As a whole for water supply this year, it is looking to be a very dry year. We're at roughly 60% of average right now for the northern part of California. It's actually tracking significantly below 2014-15 in terms of water going into the reservoirs up north. So we're expecting longer than typical Term 91 curtailment this year. Probably, my guess is probably starting by June 1, if not a little bit earlier. June 1 is when it started 2 years ago. Last year, as you may recall, we did not have a Term 91 curtailment because last year was a very different water year. It's a really good, this is a really good reminder of how highly variable water supply is in California. Where last year we had a lot of water, no curtailment. This year, it's a critical year and most likely a longer than typical curtailment.
Now, Tim, as I understand it, because of our senior right, the curtailment doesn't affect us until October and November. Is that accurate?
No, the curtailment will affect us the day that it goes into effect, which could be probably not too much before June 1, but it really depends on how does April and May turn out in terms of rainfall. If it doesn't rain at all the rest of the time, it may be early, even middle of May. The Term 91 curtailment affects us immediately. We switch to our senior water right. In terms of deliveries, we continue to deliver water, but what we end up looking out for is that we expect the curtailment, once it starts, will go through the end of October. Just because we wouldn't want to use our CVP water right as a block of water that once it's gone, it's gone. We would have to turn the plant off if we ran out of that water before Term 91 ended. So what we will do is the partners will be working in the next week or two on the plan to deal with that. And basically we'll run the plant at a lower flow rate to stretch that water right out for as long as we think it will go on for. So if, for example, it starts June 1, it's 150 days until October 31. We're right around that. We'll divide 7,500 acre feet by 150 days, and that's how much we use every day. Kind of just in real, and each partner can use their allocation a little bit differently, but that's what we'll end up doing. If the curtailment goes past October 31, we have no access to either water right, in which case we would need a supplemental water supply to continue to deliver water.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Quick update on where we are with the water supply risk and resiliency assessment. We have been working on that. The demand side is completed. We are looking at demand going forward to be less than what was planned 10 years ago. We've also looked at the supply risks, and there are definitely risks to our water supply as we understand. We had originally been planning on a kind of a detailed update to the board at this meeting. It is a pretty complicated topic that we wanted to be able to do in person. So we pushed that off until June, just because it's much better to bring in MBK and Ryan to help explain what we've been looking at and what those risks and opportunities are for water supply for the agency. Much better to do in person. If we are still on virtual meetings at June, we may try to do it in June and see how it goes. So we understand risk to supply. It is a real risk in November, December in particular, that really roughly once every 3 years is the potential for Term 91 to be at least part of that time. So that's something that we've seen recently, and that is expected to continue. We've had a few very introductory conversations with a couple of potential water sellers. So there are opportunities for us to address shortfalls in water supply and address risks. But again, they've been very preliminary conversations. They've been positive, but we're nowhere close to bringing anything back to the board at this point. And really, we want to have a good discussion with the board first on what truly are our risks and what truly are the opportunities before we start putting something together on that. Jumping over to the joint intake, we have completed the work on the raw water pumps. All 4 pumps are completed back in service. We have completed the permitting work for the erosion erosion repairs at the joint intake site. The CEQA document is up for board consideration today. I did meet with RD 2035 on site this week to show them the problem. We've showed them the problem before, but really work on getting the buy-in, as this is a common features item that needs to be worked on. The erosion has gotten worse because the water level did not get that high in the Sacramento River this year. There's, I think you may recall the pictures from previous board meetings where there's kind of a 2-foot erosion about midway up the bank. There's another one just like that, just above the hybrid or the refugia for the fish. So there's kind of 2 areas of erosion now. Just because the river didn't come up enough, it made itself another eroded area. So we do need to get that work done hopefully later on this year. You may recall at the January board meeting, the board did approve a non-exclusive agreement with the railroad for use of the part of the joint intake area for parking for railroad customers. That agreement has not yet been executed. The reason for that is RD 2035 had required the railroad to actually get a property survey completed to mark out in the field the property line between the agencies or the joint intake facility and the railroad property. That has not yet happened. So we're waiting on that to happen before that agreement is actually finalized. There will eventually be another agreement coming back to the board with RD 1600. RD 1600 has used our property for flood fight staging for several decades. And they're still under kind of a verbal agreement with both the agency and RD 2035 to be able to store equipment and materials in the event there's a flood fight on the Sacramento River. There is a desire to formalize that agreement. So that's something that we will bring up for consideration eventually. There is a draft document been circulated. Dick Shanahan reviewed it, made comments. That's back at RD 2035. It's something they're working on eventually. One last thing to report on the intake. It seems like there was a push earlier for RD 2035 to annex the joint intake site from RD 1600 to RD 2035. That is no longer moving forward. At this time, that seems to have stopped as soon as the agency's potential annexation from the county to the city stopped. So some good news there. That's a little bit less work on the intake. Over at the water treatment plant, the water treatment plant is running well. CH Swimhill, our operator, has taken some significant steps to make sure that there's continuity of operation during the coronavirus time. They've changed staffing arrangements. Certain people are working from home, certain people in the office, making sure certain operators are not working at the same time to make sure that you have a high enough level operator always available to work at the plant. The plant has shut down any visitors. That was done back in early March until at least May 1. And then now just this week, now they're requiring everybody on site to wear masks. With that, any questions, comments on the updates?
Members of the board, any questions of Tim?
No questions from Camille. Thank you.
All right. Sounding like there's no questions from the board members. Lenan, has anyone sent an email about this?
No, I have received no public comment or any comments about this.
All right. So with that, we'll consider that the report on the status of operations as well as the general manager. And before I forget, let me take a moment to say thank you to Lenan and Stan for going through the challenges of doing an electronic meeting. But the rest of us are ending up on lots of these. But thank you for making this happen for us. Hopefully next time this will not be necessary.
Right.
Convenient for us, but not as good as being together. All right, so that takes us up to item 3 on the agenda, which is the fiscal year 2021 budget overview. Tim, are you presenting that budget?
Yes, I am. Stan will be scrolling through the slides for us as we go through. So as can be expected, the agency's budget is relatively straightforward. We have 2 main categories. We have the operations and maintenance category, which is really cost to produce and treat drinking water, and as well as agency oversight and contingency. And then really the other half of our budget, it is almost 50-50 between the two. The other half is SREF debt and reserve payments for the cost of building the facility that we completed a few years ago. Next. This first slide, or this next slide, is really just a comparison of where we are in our current budget, basically just a point in time. These are expenditures through the month of February. So it's really 2/3 of the year, so our expenses are relatively close to 2/3 of the total, which makes some sense. And that's true against with the project partners, Davis, UC Davis, and Woodland. Woodland's a little bit less than, well, I guess we're less than half, and that's only because Woodland has not paid yet the second SRF installment. It's not that that's late, it's just that the loans were closed at different times and have different payment schedules. So Woodland's loan will be paid when it's due. It's just that it hasn't happened yet. Will happen in the next 3 months or next 4 months though. Any questions on where we are?
It sounded like we had some good news though, in terms of how we're doing budget-wise.
Yes, we do. That's coming up. Yes.
We like good news.
And I guess, and I might be presaging this, but with people staying home and industry slowing down, does that look like that's going to change anything for us?
It's hard to say because people are staying home, so theoretically they would be using more water at home, but then also businesses, some of them are closed. So I don't know. I think probably for us, the bigger factor this year in terms of our next budget is Shasta critical year and a longer than typical duration term 91 curtailment. Because that'll affect our ability to treat and deliver as much water as our project partners want. So this slide is where we are with our current budget and our projections through the end of the fiscal year. We are projecting to be fairly significantly under budget. This has been a bit typical for us, but our next budget will reflect that a little bit better. O&M category, and I'll get into the reasons behind all these in the next couple slides. So really, under the O&M category, that's the cost of treating and delivering water. We're roughly $1 million under budget. Agency oversight's relatively equal. That category has about 18 or 20 small dollar tasks. So we're over on some, under on some, but overall we're under a little bit. Permits and water supply, agency administration, and contingency are all under for various reasons. I'll get to those next. But altogether, we're roughly $1.7 million under. Well, we're projecting to be roughly $1.7 million under our budget for this year. And with that, I'll go into the reasons why in the next few slides. On the O&M category, the 100 series, we're forecasting coming in roughly $1 million under our current budget, and about 90% of this is due to we're using a little bit less water than what was forecasted, thereby reducing our variable costs as well as our reducing electricity and chemical costs. Some of this has to do with the fact that Woodland-Davis, and I'm a little bit less sure about UC Davis, but the cities are roughly 20 to 30% below our demands in 2013. And that's still true. And so we had been every year kind of forecasting a little bit, maybe water demand will come back. So I think last year we took our average demands from the previous 2 years and added 5%. And we've not used 5% more water every year. So that's kind of been, the demand has been really flat from the project partners. But when we thought there would be drought fatigue, people would start using water again, and they just really haven't. So on the next budget, we actually cut some of that out. So it's a little bit lower. The 200 series is really, it's 15,000 under budget plan, but really there's, like I said, there's about 18 items that are small dollar amounts, and we're plus or minus on most of those, and it's relatively flat, I guess, in that category. Next slide. The 300 series, we're about 100,000 under the planned budget, and it's only because the water supply risk and alternative study that we're working on, we're going to complete most of that work this year. However, some of it will roll over into next year. So it's not so much that we're underspending that item. It's just that some of the work that was originally planned for this year will be done next fiscal year. So that budget's really just the next year's budget. Underspent this year, but in next year's budget. Under the 400 series, the agency administration, it's kind of a similar thing. We actually underspent the plan for property tax council because that issue has been resolved differently than it otherwise could have been. And then the urban water management plan was fully budgeted this year. We are waiting for guidance from the State Water Resources Control Board on how to put that together. They have not yet released that. They're still working on it. So that work will not even start this year. It'll start next fiscal year, so it's included in next year's budget. The contingency is something that we've talked about at previous budget meetings. We had a $464,000 contingency in our budget this year. We did not use it, and don't expect that we will use it by the end of the year. Next. So in a comparison of the current budget to next year's budget, we are on the 100 O&M category. We're forecasting a reduction of $720,000. And that's reflective of a reduced conservatism in water demand and also increasing cost for electricity and chemicals. So there is a reduction in O&M category. And again, I have slides on exactly how these things have changed in the next few slides. So I should just talk to the numbers right now. O&M oversight is a slight increase over last year. We can explain that. Permits, water supply, agency administration are all lower than they were last year. by about $230,000 each. Operations contingency is a 5% on the O&M category, so that's reduced because the O&M category is reduced. The 600 series of debt reserve payment, that's $972 is really, it's really matching up what we actually paid to SRF to our budget. There was a slight typo or something last year, so it's just changing that number to what it actually is. Next slide. So in the 100 series, the reason we're projecting a reduction in our budget by about 724,000. Lower project deliveries. I think I mentioned we're cutting some of the conservative. We didn't have, I don't think, too much conservatism, but we're cutting a little bit of that out. And then also a reflection of our expected longer than typical Term 91 curtailment. A couple one-time things. Most of the effort on the AWIA risk and resilience assessment has been completed. About 75% of the work is done now in this fiscal year, 25% in next fiscal year. So that category is much lower. The raw water work, or the raw water pump work at the joint intake, that was about roughly a $250,000 item. That was a one-time thing. That work is done and will not be repeated next year. Next. On the 200 series, the O&M oversight category is 27,000 higher than our current budget. It would have been under, except for the fact that we have in our contract with CH2M Hill that we would do a third-party inspection every 5 years. And this next fiscal year, when we get to the end of it, is actually our 5-year anniversary of treating and delivering water already, if you can believe that. So we do have in the contract that we would do a third-party inspection. It is an agency-owned facility. CH is the operator. We have full confidence in CH's ability to maintain and operate the facility for the long run. But because it is an agency-owned facility, we want to bring in a third party just to check things out. So that's a once every 5-year thing that will happen in the next fiscal year. Permits and water supply category, that's about $236,000 lower. And that's mainly because that category included the water supply risk and alternatives evaluation, which will be largely completed in this fiscal year, so that's not repeated next year. 400 series, the agency administration budget. This is really good news. $233,000 lower largely because of taxes. We did not include $200,000 for taxes this year. We do have the $100,000 for insurance, and that will continue. We're also looking at a reduction in property tax special counsel because the issue is largely been resolved. We still are working through the BOE on the return of the money that would eventually be coming back to us, and that will take some time. Timing on that, I would expect probably a few to several months on getting that finally completed, but that is in process now. The 500 series contingency, it is 5% of the overall budget, so it's 60,000 lower than our current year. One thing we're looking to do this year a little bit differently than in the past is, in past years, we've had the contingency budget, we approved that as part of budget, and then we charge the project partners for that contingency. Then as the year goes on, we do not spend that money. So it ends up being unspent money, which we then return to the project partners in Q2 of the following year. So what we're asking for board input on this time is to include it in the budget, so we have authority to spend the contingency if necessary, but instead of charging the project partners, leave it sit in the reserve account. So that way we're not charging the project partners and then refunding them a year later. Just let it sit in the reserve account. If we use it, then we refill it later. If we don't use it, it rolls over to the following years. We have not yet spent the contingency in the last 3 years plus of operations. There are certain things that could cause us to, but we don't really see that as something we're really going to be doing all that frequently.
Shall we stop right there and get board response to that point,
Sure.
Tim?
Yes.
Sounds reasonable to me. I'd be happy to hear what my colleagues think. Anybody?
It sounds reasonable to me as well. That makes sense. It doesn't make sense to, if it's unnecessary to keep it going back and forth.
Thank you, Will. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Hi, this is Don. I have a question on another item that's within the amounts that Tim has already presented. Is it all right to ask that question at this time?
I think, let's just see if we've got consensus on the other point. Does anybody disagree with the idea of holding the contingency funds so that we don't constantly rebate it back to the jurisdictions, and then charge them again the following year. Does anybody disagree with that?
So this is Camille, and I'll just say, I think that makes a lot of sense for right now, but maybe we could be flexible about this as well, as we watch our jurisdictions grapple with the budget outcomes from COVID response. I know that's certainly something we're really thinking hard about over at UC Davis right now.
Mhm. Yeah, the effect of this is that it would actually reduce what we charge the project partners starting this budget cycle going forward.
Which sounds
All right.
great.
That sounds like we have consensus with the understanding that we can change this policy anytime. Okay. With that, Don, please proceed with your question.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So Tim, the item that in the staff report, you've got a little bit more detail in the line items. So in item 409, insurance, based on your presentation just now, are you saying that insurance item 409 includes property tax payments as well as insurance of some kind?
No, that's just the insurance. We pay roughly $100,000 in insurance to YC Parmia every year for our facilities, for both the water treatment plant and the intake. That same category held the property tax and the insurance as two different line items previously.
Okay, so I'm looking at it now. So I think that you just explained it. So it shows for 1920, 300,000, and
Yes.
for 2021, 200 or 100,000. So that's where you used to have two separate items. You've combined them and deleted the item.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim, do you want to proceed then with your presentation?
Yes. Yeah, so the next one, not the most exciting, is SREF debt and reserve payment. It's essentially unchanged other than the $972 to match up what we actually paid to our budget. That one's not going to change again for the next 17 years or so while we continue to pay that down.
It'll be beyond our having to worry about it.
Yes. So next step that we have, we'll work to fine tune the O&M budget over the next month and a half or so, and then bring the final budget to the board in June for approval. With that, the next slide is questions. So any questions that anybody has on any item?
This is a non-action item at this point. It's basically background.
Yes, yeah, it's informational. And if the board has any questions, anytime between now and June, feel free to reach out to Stan or myself. We're more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I'd also like to say how good Will looks with the monument sign behind him out there at the treatment plant. Very cool.
Well,
Thank you.
location. I'm 6 feet away from anyone who's actually working today. So it's good.
We had no doubt that you were socially distancing. All right. Well,
I
thank
was
you.
going to ask Will if he had an appropriate background for every one of the meetings that he's going to, because that's a party trick.
I have inappropriate background.
You can save those for some other group.
Yeah. Zoom after dark.
Like the Davis City Council, you've already been through that. All right. Well, thank you for the presentation of the budget. We know that represents a fair amount of work, so thank you. Let's see, that brings us to item 4 on our agenda, to consider adoption of resolution approving the RD 2035 WDCWA joint intake and fish screen CEQA EIR initial study addendum number 3 for erosion work and authorizing performance of the work. You mentioned that briefly in your update. Do you want to give us a little more information about what the costs are in this project?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting exercise in permitting costs, really. So yeah, there's 2 items for the board to consider today: the CEQA document to allow us to do the work, and we've already completed and applied for the permits for this work, including paying fees to several different state agencies. And then the second item is authorization to bid. So I did meet with RD 2035 over on site a couple of days ago, and one thing we may possibly consider is RD 2035 may be able to do the work themselves, but it's far too early to try to get on that path yet. So we would like authorization to bid, although there may potentially be a different path going forward to getting the work done. The total cost of this is somewhere in the neighborhood of $260,000. Unfortunately, more than half of that is permitting cost. Because it is worked directly in the Sacramento River, in the river actually, we have to get a permit, just like if we were doing any levee project of any size. It's really the same permitting effort. than simply putting some rocks in the slope. All we're really doing is putting some rock slope protection on the slope, but because of where it is, we had to do the full suite of permitting. So the construction cost is roughly $100,000 of the total cost of $260,000.
We can't do this.
It is a common facility, so RD 2035 is really expected to pay 80% of that work. So we're working that out with them that we won't put this out on the street for bidding unless we have their full concurrence that they will be paying the 80% of the cost. And then we'll work out the details with them on that in the next few weeks. But if it works out that they can actually do the work themselves, we would probably pick that route.
So we're looking at about $50,000 for our costs.
Yes, roughly.
Thank you. So it's an action item as I see it here.
Yes. Yeah, there's two action items.
All right. Is there board comment on any of either of these items?
Arnold moves approval.
Of both items?
Yeah, can we take them at once?
Can we take them up at a single time? I see heads nodding, so we'll do it that way. Arnold has moved that we adopt both the items relative to agenda item 4. Is there a second to Will's motion?
Landsberg, second.
Thank you, Rich. So we have a motion by Arnold, second by Landsberg, to approve both action items, which are part of agenda item 4, relative to repairing the erosion control issue at our intake. Further discussion? Has any member of the public weighed in?
No, I have not received any emails up to this minute.
Thank you, Lynn. Therefore, we will call for the ayes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, look, I only heard ayes, but I didn't hear a lot of them. But I presume everybody supports this motion. That being the case, the motion is carried.
I just wanted to say you could actually have everybody have a vote yes or no on the Zoom call if you wanted to get it recorded.
You mean by roll call?
There should be. I guess it's muted for this. Okay,
Right.
Never mind.
You know, because of the importance of the item, Lynn, why don't you do a roll call for this vote?
Okay, sure. Okay, so Chair Stallard, your vote?
Aye.
Okay,
Stallard.
got it. Vice Chair Arnold?
Aye.
All right. Director Lee?
Yes.
All right. Director Landsberg?
Aye.
All right. Thank you. Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you, Lynn. All right, so that brings us up to item 5, which is the long-range board calendar. Is that you again, Tim?
Yeah. So there's not too much on there other than the next board meeting is right now scheduled for June 18th in Davis. So we'll know later on whether or not it will be a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting.
Thank you. So I presume there are no comments on the long-range board calendar at this point. All right.
Where is the next meeting? I don't have the calendar, but the schedule with me. Is it in Woodland or Davis?
In Davis.
Thank you.
All right. Or online, depending on what the orders of the governor are. All right, so we move on then to board member comments, item 6 on our agenda. Are there any board member comments today?
No
Mr.
comments for me.
All right.
I have a comment, Mr. Chairman. This is Don. Just wanted to
Don.
let you know that on the Board of Supervisors agenda for Tuesday, April 21st, we will be designating Gary Sandy, Chair of the Board, as alternate member for this agency.
Thank you. It'll be his return.
Right.
All right. Thank you. So now we are continuing, again, any further board member comments?
Just briefly, Mr. Chair, this is Rich
Yes.
Landsberg.
Yes, sir.
Camille made a comment, and I want to follow up on that comment that about the budgets coming up next year. I reviewed the letter that was issued by all the city managers to all the agencies that are listed on the letter, including, YECA, YCPRME, et cetera. And it would behoove us to join all the agencies to tighten our belt by 5% if we can, to make it look like we're all the same boat anyways. But because all the jurisdictions are battling with this COVID-19 response, that would behoove us to participate in budget tightening by that 5% recommendation. We can look at that.
Yeah, this is Tim. So I heard about this actually a little bit today. So one thing that maybe, well, I guess two things. One, overall, our actually budget plan is roughly a 5% drop from last year. So we actually are kind of doing that just organically. The other thing that may be a little bit different for us is that we do have debt obligations that we have to pay 100% of our SRF loans, and operations expenses really are what they are. For the most part, we pay electricity, chemicals, the cost of our contractual obligations in terms of operating the water treatment plant. We don't have a lot of room other than reducing supply of water in order to manage costs. So it's just going to work out this year that we are actually going to reduce our budget roughly by 5%. But it's hard for us to, we really don't have any place to cut if we actually tried to. You might, I don't know, Stan, do you have any other things to add to that?
No, I would agree with that. It's not the agency doesn't have a lot of discretionary costs, if you will. I mean, it's either contracted or SRF, required debt payments. So, but I do think, as you saw over the past couple of years, actually, except for the one-time costs of the studies, we have been on a downward trend, trying to hone in and be more, I guess, less conservative, you could say, with the cushion that we keep with the budget each year. So I think, and with that 5% reduction you're seeing this time, that's us and the staff continuing to hone that into a more accurate number that is reflective of the ongoing actual costs.
So we got lucky this year, and we should capitalize on that probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for the explanation. Rich, does that satisfy the inquiry at this point?
It does. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other board comments today? Well, there being none, we are going to go into closed session. I would like to just announce in advance that we anticipate no reportable action from this conversation. If in the event there were, I authorized Lynn Ann Melhoff as our clerk to add it to the record, the video record following our closed session. I believe that will satisfy our legal obligation. How are we now going to transition from this public meeting to a closed session discussion?
Well, I would, so we're not moving on, but I would ask, I'm looking at the attendees and I'm not sure, based on the discussion point, Jeremy probably would not be in closed session. There was one, I am going to unmute right now, one number and see who this is. Phone number ending in 3083.
Craig Walker.
Oh, Craig. Nice. Okay. Thanks. So from that perspective, I think anyone that would not be part of the closed session, which I believe would be Jeremy, if you could go ahead and end your call, that would be great.
Will do. Thank you, guys.
Bye, Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy.
And then Kim, I'm not sure with the item is regarding a different matter, so I believe you can go ahead and end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just for information, another group that I'm associated with actually had a second call-in number for the closed session, and we had a 5-minute recess between the two, so there was no necessity to have to hang up.
Yep, and I think we're going to get there. I think.
Well, we may never have to if this.
Hopefully we don't, but we'll see. Yes, and I think that's it. I think everyone else could be part of the closed session.
All right. Well, we all got a little memo, so we're in closed session now. I'll call that.
One question.
Yes.
I should stop recording? Yes.
Oh yes.
Yes.
So hang on. I'm going to unshare let me unshare my screen.
Okay.
And then, oh, hang on. All right, we are recording again.
Thank you. We have just concluded our brief closed session and there is no reportable action. And that concludes our meeting for today. We thank everybody for their interest in attending and participating. With that, we are adjourned. Good day, everyone.
Night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe, stay healthy.
Thank you.
Right.